I'm Montclair Community Church, Pastor Lee here with our midday devotional. We are in our series on emotions. We are, I think, part 8 of 10 today. And what I want to talk about today is grief. Grief over the loss of a loved one. You know, there are Christians, and maybe even sometimes it sneaks into our own hearts. We think that grieving over the death of a loved one, of visibly crying and being in pain, even though we know they're in heaven, somehow shows some kind of a lack of faith. You know, R.C. Sproul used to tell a story about a woman whose husband had passed away, whose pastor encouraged her that it would be a better testimony for her not to show grief. It would show this great faith that she believed her husband was in a better place. And she did believe that, but here's my question. What does the Bible say about grief? How should our knowledge that death is not the end affect how we grieve here? Well, let's take an example from the Bible. Let's go to John chapter 11, where we read about the death of Lazarus. Now, Lazarus and his sisters Mary and Martha, they were really good friends of Jesus. Jesus loved this family. And we read in chapter 11 how Lazarus, the beloved brother, he gets sick and he dies. And Jesus comes to his disciples days after he's been buried. And of course, we know the story. Jesus calls Lazarus forth from a tomb. And Lazarus comes out of a tomb fully restored and alive. And what a miracle it is. And we see that it was meant to show God's glory. It was meant to show Jesus' power over death. And it's just a foreshadowing of the resurrection of all the righteous at the end of the age when Christ returns. But what I want to do is focus on one particular verse in this narrative. It's a well-known verse. It's actually a verse that you have memorized, whether you realize it or not. It is John 11:35, and it says simply this: Jesus wept. We're told that Jesus wept at the death of his friend, but why? I mean, Jesus knew Lazarus was going to die, right? He's God. Of course he knew. He knows the end from the beginning. And not only did Jesus know Lazarus was going to die, but when we go back earlier in the chapter, we read this. We read that when Jesus heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Jesus literally waited for Lazarus to die and be buried before he returned to Bethany. And not only did Jesus know Lazarus was going to die, and not only did Jesus wait until he died before doing anything, but Jesus knew exactly what he was going to do when he got to Lazarus' tomb. And not only that, he knew why he was going to do what he was going to do. Let's go back to the very beginning of the chapter. We read, "Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. It was Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was ill. So his sister sent to him, saying, 'Lord, he whom you love is ill.' But when Jesus heard it, he said, 'This illness does not lead to death. It is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it.'" And that's exactly what happened. So that means not only did Jesus know Lazarus was going to die, and not only did he purposely wait a few days until Lazarus was dead and buried, and not only did he know that he was going to raise him from the dead, and not only did he know that he would be glorified through it all, but Jesus did something else. Jesus wept. We read how Jesus looked around and saw his good friends, Mary and Martha, and saw the pain that they were in, how he looked around and he saw all the friends of Lazarus there who were grieving and mourning, and we're told that he was deeply moved in his spirit and he was greatly troubled, and that he wept. Because you see, Jesus, the God-man who knows the end from the beginning, who has the power to give life, he looked around and he saw something. He saw death. He saw what God never intended. Because you see, God's original design did not include death. That's a result of the fall. That is why, no matter if you're a Christian or an atheist or a Buddhist or whatever you might be, deep down, you know that when you see death, it is unnatural. It is not the way things were meant to be. That is why we grieve at death. And when we're met with death, when we are met with the ultimate result of sin in the world, not only do we grieve, we should grieve. And Christians, when our brothers and sisters grieve, we are called to stand alongside them and grieve with them, because listen, grief is good. Grief is healthy. Grief is necessary. Grief is healing. You see, even the ability to grieve, the fact that we grieve is but by the grace of God. So what I want us to remember is that when we grieve the loss of a loved one on this side of heaven, remember that we are in good company when we grieve. Because even Jesus, When faced with the reality of death, he grieved. He wept. And when we grieve, we never grieve alone. Jesus grieves with us. And let us also remember, just like our lives, the grief that we experience because of death is but for a moment. And in our eternity with Jesus, there will be no death and there will be no grief. We read in Revelation 21, behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. He will dwell with them, and they will be his people. And God himself will be with them as their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. And death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain anymore. For the former things have passed away. So on this side of eternity, we should grieve when faced with the loss of a loved one. But we should also look to the day when Jesus will wipe every tear away and will do away with death and will do away with grief. And to that I say, come Lord Jesus.